An unprecedented power struggle in Iran. The supreme leader is warning President Mahmood Ahmadinejad to either reinstate a sacked cabinet minister or quit. So what's behind the rift between Ahmadinejad and Ayatollah Ali Khamenei? And what does this all mean for Iran? This is Inside Story. Welcome to this edition of Inside Story. I'm Dareen Abughaida. So there's an unprecedented power struggle, as we're saying, at the highest level of Iran's government. The confrontation escalated after President Mahmood Ahmadinejad, he declined to officially support the supreme leader's reinstatement of Heydar Moslehi. He's a cabinet minister fired by the president. Making his position clear on the issue, Ahmadinejad effectively went on strike for 10 days and he skipped cabinet meetings. But in a country where unwritten rules demand no one should oppose the supreme leader, Ahmadinejad's future now seems uncertain. So let's discuss all of this, put it to my guests. I'm joined from Tehran by Mohammed Syed Marandi. He's a professor of political science at Tehran University. From London, Mehrdad Khonsari. He's a former Iranian diplomat. And from Doha, we have Majoob Zweiri. He's an expert on Iran and the former head of Iranian studies at Durham University. Welcome, gentlemen, all of you, to Inside the Story. Lots to talk about today on the program. Mehrdad, if I can just come over to you first, over in London. So what's your assessment of this rift and just how serious it is or may be?
Well, I think it's now essentially blown over, because I think that as we speak, there has been a cabinet meeting in which Mr. Moslehi has participated with Mr. Ahmadinejad. So I think the crisis is essentially over, in the sense that Mr. Ahmadinejad has been forced to back down in the struggle that he tried to initiate. I think that many people are aware of the fact that Mr. Ahmadinejad had been trying to increase the powers of the presidency and his own powers and those of his cronies inside Iran. And essentially, while many people, or many of his opponents, portrayed him as a sort of a Hitler waiting for Hindenburg to die, he was trying to move in before Hindenburg actually died. But that has not happened. And I think that for the time being, this is a battle that has to be postponed. But nevertheless, it does show the level of rift that does exist at the top of the hierarchy in Iran. And without question, it leaves the Iranian leadership in a much weaker position and much more vulnerable position than it was prior to the start of this debate.
I'd definitely like to talk more about the position of the Iranian leadership, as you're saying, Mehrdad. But Mohammed, over to you, because you're in Tehran at the moment. What are you seeing there? Has this blown over?
Well, I don't think that we should call it a power struggle, in the sense that we have the same sort of thing in Western countries. But when it comes to non-Western countries, it's often depicted in a different way. This is politics. The president wanted to remove the Minister of Intelligence, and the leader, for what many believe are justified reasons, opposed it. One is because we are nearing parliamentary elections, and they don't want any sort of rumors to be spread that the Minister of Intelligence has been moved in order to manipulate, for example, the elections. A year before the presidential elections, the president removed the Minister of the Interior, and he needlessly caused rumors about the elections, whereas the president clearly did win. If you look at the polls and so on that were carried out by Americans, he won. But the leader was opposed to this. And also, with regards to the Minister of the Intelligence, it is believed that the President's Chief of Staff was the person behind this, and it is believed that he is overstepping his authority. So the leader told him that you should not remove the minister. He was not happy with this, but the leader didn't threaten him that he would put him aside. The president, apparently, from what I've heard, he said that if I can't work with him, can I resign? And the leader said, apparently, this is what I've heard, that you can do that. But Mr. Ahmadinejad, as your good guest before me pointed out, accepted the Minister of Intelligence in today's cabinet meeting. And I think that the president's position is weakened significantly as a result, because his chief of staff isn't popular among the political elite and among parliamentarians and so on.
Mahjoub, I wonder if you can just explain to our viewers and some of us that may not be particularly familiar with the workings of Iranian politics and the inner circles, who actually rules Iran? I mean, you have President Mahmood Ahmadinejad, and of course you have the supreme leader.
You know, the whole thing, what we are seeing now can be explained by understanding the nature of politics in Iran. If you look at the crisis now in Iran, it has two sides. One, it is the constitutional side, which allows the supreme leader to intervene according to the Article 109, and also it gives him the authority to actually to make a strong decision against the president decisions. The other side of the story, which is the political side, where basically you put the question, if the president knows that this authority is being given to the supreme leader, why he is not actually listening to that and does not respect the authority of the president, the supreme leader. So basically, the president knows that if he doesn't listen to the supreme leader, he has to implement Articles 130 and 131, where basically he has to resign and then leaves things for an early elections. So basically what we are seeing now, that the authority of the supreme leader has been confirmed, and this is not the first time. We have to remember that supreme leader has intervened in 2002 when Mohammed Khatami decided to give more authority to the president, and supreme leader called Karoubi at that time, he was the speaker, and asked him not to discuss that two bills in 2002. So basically there is a history of supreme leader intervention, and again, according to the constitution, he's authorized to do so. However, we have to look, this shows also a level of complexity within the political system, because basically, you know, this is referring to the what's so-called the Wali al-Faqih, who has actually hold all of the authorities in the Iranian system now, and basically all those who are ruling in Iran, whether a president, speaker, they know they have to listen to they have to obey, to follow the decision made by the supreme leader. So basically, I think the focus should be on the political side of the story. Otherwise, the constitutional has given the supreme leader to intervene.
Okay, well, just based on what you're talking about, let me give our viewers some more information on the men that are actually behind this. And of course, there's Ali Khamenei. He's only the second supreme leader since the Iranian Revolution, and he took his position following the death of Khomeini. That was in 1989. Now, he's neither head of state nor head of the government, but he's seen as the ultimate spiritual as well as political authority on all matters, such as our guests have been telling us. And in effect, this makes the Iranian presidency and the entire Iranian political and judicial process subordinate to his will. Then there's Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, of course, the president. He's the sixth president of Iran following his election in 2005, and rising from relative obscurity. His re-election in 2009 saw Iran's worst political unrest since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, and he's among a younger generation of politicians who are fiercely loyal to him, and his tough stance against the US and Israel have also proved popular in Iran and among the people there. So that's just a bit of background information. Mohammed, if I can come over to you over in Tehran, what do you make of the argument that this fight is in fact for the control of the future of Iran?
Well, I'd like to mention one thing first, and that is that the leader, the Wali al-Faqih, he is himself elected by another council that's elected, and it's a very powerful council called the Council of Experts, or the Khobragan. And they choose the leader, and they can remove the leader. So it's not as if there are no checks and balances at that level. And also there are lots of checks and balances in the Constitution. The president is very powerful, but it's generally perceived that the chief of staff of Mr. Ahmadinejad is trying to build a power base for himself from his position, as he is a very important person in the president's office. He is the most important person. arguably. And Parliament is very critical of him, and it has been perceived, it is believed that the sudden removal of, for example, the foreign minister when he was on a mission abroad was brought about because of his decision. And the same is true about, it is believed, about the Minister of Intelligence. And so there's been a lot of criticism of his actions and some of the people who he's gathered around himself. And
do you believe that the Chief of Staff... Okay, let me just press you on this for just a moment, and then I'm going to come and talk to our guests in London and in Doha. But do you believe, Mohammed, that Heydar Moslehi, who is the Chief of Staff that you refer to, was he in fact behind all of this?
Well, it is very difficult to say because, you know, there's a lot of talk and there are lots of people talking about the issue. But it seems that, yes, he is very central to what has been going on. He apparently is the person who wanted the Minister of the Interior removed, the Minister of Intelligence removed. And that is one reason why this was prevented. He doesn't have a very strong power base, and he doesn't have the charisma and the popularity of Mr. Ahmadinejad at all. Mr. Ahmadinejad is a very good speaker. He has an effect when he speaks in crowds. But Mr. Moslehi just simply does not have that capability. But it seems that he is trying to build a power base, and you know, we have checks and balances in the Constitution. And as your previous guest pointed out correctly, in accordance with the Constitution, the act of the President's office has been prevented and blocked. Okay,
and looking forward, Mehrdad, of course, there are elections coming up in 2013. So is this a way for Mr. Moslehi, who is the Chief of Staff, and also we must mention the son-in-law of President Mahmood Ahmadinejad? So is he trying to pave the way for himself in these elections?
Well, I think, first of all, to try to separate Mr. Moslehi from Ahmadinejad is a gross error. Mr. Moslehi represents Mr. Ahmadinejad in almost every respect, and had Mr. Ahmadinejad had his way to begin with, he would have been the first vice president of Iran. Therefore, whatever he does is not separate from the will and wishes of Mr. Ahmadinejad, and Mr. Ahmadinejad has nourished the idea that maybe Mr. Moslehi should try and succeed him, but obviously there's a great deal of opposition from people within the ruling establishment to him and to the kind of ideas that lay behind what has become popularly known in Iran as Moslehism. But Moslehism is essentially an act on the part of Ahmadinejad and his supporters or cronies who, having usurped power 2 years ago, are now trying to move against the rest of the people who are not part and parcel of their own constituency. And this act of encroachment on the power and the authority vested in the supreme leader and the tenets of the Constitution, which is at the crux of everything as far as the Iranian people are concerned, because this is the very Constitution that denies the right to popular sovereignty to the entire Iranian nation. These issues aside, Mr. Ahmadinejad has tried to encroach on these, and it is for this that this latest battle is being fought. So when you ask about the next election, or whether it's the forthcoming parliamentary or the next presidential election, it is hardly likely for anyone other than people belonging to this constituency to get anywhere. In other words, the reformists are completely out. So there's a battle going on between supporters of Ahmadinejad and those who sort of classify themselves under the supreme leader. To expect anybody outside this framework to gain any position of prominence as a result of any election, I think is a ridiculous thought, and it's not going to happen, because these people have paid a very, very heavy price in terms of popular opinion, both within Iran and outside, to get to where they are, and it's very unlikely that they would give away on that. But their position has become weakened as a result of this clash amongst themselves, which will essentially leave the Iranian situation open to all kinds of other possibilities in line with what is happening in the region.
Mahjoub, our guest there, yes, I'm going to come to you because I can see you wanting to jump in there. But also let me ask you, my guest from London talking about the weakening position there of President Ahmadinejad. But what about the position of the supreme leader? How is he perceived after this clash?
Look, first of all, the elections, I think, is the main motivation of this crisis, because basically we know that before any elections in Iran, there's kind of fragmentation, appear within the main power which ruled. I mean, looking at Iran last 7 years, conservatives were ruling the country. Ahmadinejad has caused kind of fragmentation with this kind of body which actually controlled Iran since 2005. There is a lot of criticism to his performance in governing the country and ruling the country. I think he created two kind of fronts. One was basically those who are close to the supreme leader, where basically they criticized Ahmadinejad's policies and accused him actually of not performing very well in the economic front and political front. And those who are the follower or the fan of Ahmadinejad, who believe that Ahmadinejad actually did well, and actually he is representative of what's so-called a middle class people who were marginalized for years in Iran. So basically this kind of fragmentation appeared before any elections. And I think now what is going on now is actually leading to see Ahmadinejad is weakened, but also the supreme leader position is not in a good shape, because basically this kind of a criticism, this kind of, as supreme leaders criticized the kind of the discussion over this matter. I think this is weakening the image of the regime or the political system. And this is, according to the statements said by the supreme leader, this is the main concern to him, where basically he tried to say, even if there is kind of an issue between him and the president, this should not be actually in public. This should be stopped as soon as possible. So there is kind of an indication, a bad impact in both the president position and the supreme position, because I have no doubt that the president will be in next 1 year or 2 years, he will be in very weak position, whether he stays as the president or he resigned.
Mohammed, in Tehran, did the president just simply go too far this time by boycotting cabinet meetings, effectively going on strike for 10 days?
Well, if I could just make a couple of points before I get to that. One is that 2 years ago, there's no doubt that Mr. Ahmadinejad won the elections, and all the polls carried out by Americans, by Iranians, clearly showed that he was well ahead. The fact that there was no evidence of fraud, and most importantly, Dr. Akhundi, who represented him in the Ministry of the Interior, said that there was no fraud, and he has gone on record saying that. So that's one issue. But the other issue is the recent events. Mr. Ahmadinejad, this is a part of Iranian politics, and this shows that there is a diverse set of views in the country. And that is something that you have in many countries. When it comes to Iran, they call it a crisis or a power struggle. In the West, they call it politics. Here you have a diverse set of people who have very different views on the economy, on foreign policy, on internal politics, and one such view is held by the president. The leader, I think, in reality, his position has been strengthened, because after the elections, when Mr. Moslehi began to behave irrationally, taking people to the streets, causing riots, effectively aligning himself with foreign powers and even terrorist organizations through being silent when they supported him, the leader didn't respond. And basically, he tried to draw him back into the fold. And that is why most reformists have distanced themselves from Moslehi. If you look at him in parliament, the whole reformist faction have distanced themselves completely from him and have in fact denounced him. People like Dr. Khabbaz, the head of the reformist faction, and others like Dr. Pezeshkian and Mr. Tabish. On the other hand, Mr. Ahmadinejad, when he didn't want to accept the Ministry of Intelligence, the leader again didn't respond. He didn't make any statement against the president. He was very slow and very patient about it. And that is one of his strengths, because at the end of the day, Mr. Ahmadinejad accepted what the leader demanded, and as your good guest in London pointed out, he is now back in the cabinet. He was in the cabinet meeting today. I think, though, as your previous guest correctly pointed out, since we are nearing parliamentary elections, and elections in Iran have high turnouts, and Parliament is very important, you're going to have this sort of bickering as we move forward. Of course, there's still roughly 9 or 10 months left, but it's still becoming important.
All right, but some would argue that this is much more than bickering when the president of Iran clashes with the supreme leader who, in an unwritten rule, has the last word in Iran. But Mr. Khonsari, over to you in London.
It's not an unwritten rule, by the way.
It's
not an unwritten rule.
All right.
The Constitution allows the leader that, and the leader himself is supervised by the Council of Experts.
Okay, Mr.
So
Khonsari, over in London, over to you, because I saw you shaking your head there as our guest Mohammed Marandi was speaking from Tehran. So would you like to comment?
Well, I think it's a sort of a bit rich to suggest that the elections of 2 years ago were not fraudulent, and that half the people of the ruling constituency have not been thrown out of their positions of
power. That's simply not true.
And privilege, and also imprisoned and exiled as a result.
Those who rioted, obviously, yes.
And people who only expressed under the provisions of the very constitution that they are referring to, only their freedom to exercise their vocal opposition to something that had happened. I think it's a bit rich, and also
again, that's not true.
For people inside Iran, to refer to polls conducted in America. They reject everything American when it suits them, and then they make reference to polls carried out by Americans.
There are polls carried out by Iranians. There are polls and also you failed to point out that the person who represented Mr. Moslehi in the Ministry of the Interior said there was no fraud. Go look it up. Dr. Abbas Ahmadi, a professor at the University of Tehran, he ran 40,000. He ran 40,000 Moslehi supporters at the different polling booths.
You must allow
Mohammed in Tehran, can I just
representative of Mr. Moslehi?
Let's just listen to Mehrdad in London. Go ahead, sir.
I think the biggest poll is the people in the streets and the measures that have been taken against the people when they have just tried to peacefully say what is on their mind. But this is not something that can be argued in a process of this nature. But the fact is that the truth is known to the majority of people, and there has been a reluctance on the part of the regime as a whole to allow people to express themselves. That, I think, says a lot. But the point is that Mr. Ahmadinejad is a very dangerous person with very high ambitions that go well beyond the supreme leader, who's an old man. As I mentioned, the closest thing that one can say, he is like a Hitler waiting for Hindenburg to die. Now, what has happened is he has tried to encroach on the powers vested in the supreme leader knowingly in advance of events in order to try to control the situation domestically and to suppress people within his own right-wing or conservative constituency, people like Larijani, Ghalibaf, people like that who are in the same category as he is.
Okay.
Now, this has failed. This has failed.
All
but
right.
This has damaged not just Ahmadinejad, but also the supreme leader, and does not say very much for the system.
Okay, I'll just have to get the thoughts of Mahjoub in Doha. Do you think, as Mehrdad is saying in London, that this has indeed damaged not only Ahmadinejad, but the supreme leader as well? And we only have 30 seconds.
No, I have no doubt. This is ongoing crisis. It's damaging, I think, both leaders, and it will shadow the political development of Iran at least in next 2 years. I have no doubt that this is a serious matter, and this should be taken seriously.
thank you for joining us here. Mohammed Syed Marandi, Professor of Political Science at Tehran University, London. From London, Mehrdad Khonsari, and from Doha, Majoob Zweiri. Thank you very much for joining us on Inside Story. We welcome your comments and your suggestions as well. You can email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Goodbye for now.